Well, hello. I'm here. I'm alive after the holiday. I hope that soon some of you will be here too. I'm gonna give it a couple of seconds to drink some tea. My voice is a little scratchy and weird today, so I apologize if I'm a little hard to hear. I'll try to speak up, but I'm here. I say a lot. I'm working on a new episode and apparently forgot to turn off some notifications on my screen. I'm working on a new episode because I'm currently kind of waiting on something from someone for basically our fellowship episode, and hopefully I'll have that soon. And once I do, I can get the episode fully written and we'll go ahead and go straight to recording. But until then, I'm working a little bit on motivation empowerment, which is going to cover basically the various ways that people are motivated and how they can be empowered, and the difference between those things. But first, I wanted to go over the 2019 goals for leading with class, which I'm pretty excited to actually be like having goals for the year. We really want to keep this going and make it even better. And we're proud of the work we've done, John and I, and would like to see it become even more than we had originally planned. And part of that involves some of the goals that I have. Like, I intend to finish the workshop packet and post it to Patreon for all of you to see what it looks like, and so that, you know, if you know people who run conventions and would like me to come and run a workshop, I can do that. And obviously we want to finish the first season, hopefully within the next 2 months. If we can't manage that, it will be because of unforeseen circumstances, because we should be able to do it at this point. We also, I want to get the academic guide that we had put together, which is basically like a brief for various people in like academia and business and stuff like that, and post that to Patreon as well, so that you have access to it for your workplaces in case you want to recommend leading with class. And I also want to consider getting in touch with some local conventions about doing workshops, and make some briefs for season 2 and the table topics episodes that I want to work on, because I'd like to basically get working on those, and a brief will help John and I both with planning. And the game materials, it's just good to know what those are. I need to do that soon. I had done it for some of the season this season, but ran into some hiccups with what I was able to obtain, and need to see if I can plan around that this time. And John has some cool goals too. So he is basically going to be he's going to be working on the first season with me, and wants to work on producing and finishing season 2. That's a goal of mine, but I left it on John's because he was the one who mentioned it. If for me, it was just kind of like, yeah, we're gonna do that thing. Um, Obviously, it helps to write things down. And John wants to make some improvements to the set and make a homemade teleprompter to ease production, which I'm really excited about because it would ease my work quite a lot. Because right now I scroll through a Word document to look at the script, and with my memory problems from my concussion, it is very difficult to remember things from page to page at times. And we'd like to get something that kind of I don't have to manually scroll the whole time and everything. So, just a couple of our goals that we're working on, and that we're really hoping will help us move along, because we want to make leading with class still a thing. Like, we want to see it succeed, and that's a lot harder sometimes than it sounds, whenever you're also working other jobs and stuff like that. So we wanted to kind of remind you all that, yes, we do have investment in this. We do care about this. We've put a lot of time and energy into it. And we have a lot of passion for it. Even if our health and well-being hasn't always allowed us to show that or achieve our own goals so far. I mean, we've honestly done better than I expected in some ways. But I think that we always hope we can do more than we can often achieve whenever we have a lot of responsibilities. And my health interfered a lot more than we thought it would. So I'm still in recovery as part of 2019. I'm maybe finishing that up soon due to like insurance stuff and everything, but there's not really any telling if I will continue to be affected by my troubles that I've had with my brain injury. But I'm getting a lot more work done now than I was, and that's why I think we should be able to meet the goals that we have ahead of us. So, motivation and empowerment. I'm going to go ahead and open up the textbook that we reference, which is by Richard L. Daft. And I always love whenever it opens up to the "Are you an annoying follower?" one, because I absolutely am. So we'll be focusing today on the motivation empowerment episode, and I just need to get to that chapter. I clicked off of it. How did I do that? There we go. This is such a graphics heavy textbook. Every single time I open it, my computer just like groans. If anyone happens to show up, please do comment in the chat to let me know you're there, because I can't watch the viewer count and monitor my camera at the same time. I can only watch the chat. So I'm just going to go through and kind of take down some key notes. So I'm going to share screen share. So motivation, and I will go ahead and put in the comment the definition that it prefers. Ever since I added the definitions, I've had so much easier time with like making the exercises and everything like that. Just, it's so much smoother. So I really I'm gonna try and normalize this habit. So motivation is the forces either internal or external to a person that arouse enthusiasm and persistence to pursue a certain course of action. And this is from Daft. And so, like, there are a lot of different theories of motivation, and a lot of them, like, come down to, like, we talk about, like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is actually based on a needs-based kind of model that was used by, I believe, the Cherokee. I need to double check that. But that might be something I mention in this. I'm not sure. It's just been kind of appropriated from them, from the natives in the Americas, who it was basically like the idea was got from them and taken and turned into Maslow's hierarchy. So it's there's a lot of stuff that we talk about there, and I'll also have an episode about rewards, but I want to focus on kind of different pieces of this at a time. But I will be defining rewards in like intrinsic and extrinsic rewards in this episode, and just being like, we're gonna elaborate on those in the next episode, but for right now we're gonna talk about, you know, like what these things mean, because I want to talk about like not just like the things that we can give people, but like the ways we can inspire people and stuff like that, and engage people. So it's like, how do you get somebody to your game table whenever you know, you don't have any free stuff to give them, you don't have any food, they'll have to bring their own. Say you're just like a random GM and you're like, I really want to have people come over to my house to play my games. I have nothing to offer them except for the experience of playing this game for me. That's all I have. And while that itself can be a reward, there's also the motivation of like friendship and stuff like that. And we need to recognize that those are like complex and not the same as like satisfaction or personal praise and stuff like that, like that you can get as intrinsic rewards or like external rewards like stuff. So I've broken them down into 2 separate episodes to kind of address that. So I'm just gonna put rewards and extra. Oh god, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to say that word on screen. Yeah, so one of the things that I'll want to talk about is probably as positive and negative motives and the way of leading between love and fear a little bit, which I think I'm gonna break down in a table topics episode, which is something that I'm working on developing right now. But basically, like, whenever you talk about like things that are positive or negative that can motivate people, like pain can be a motivator just as much as pleasure can be a motivator. And so they talk a little bit about that in this chapter, and I really like that because there's some reality that a lot of modern capitalism is based on threats. If you don't do this job, you'll lose your house. If you don't succeed at this project, you'll get demoted. Things like that, like things that can cause pain or suffering for someone, become the norm as our like motivation. And I think that that's really toxic and damaging. And I'd really like to see that not be the norm and instead have us focus on positive approaches that are more needs based and focused on the reward rather than the punishment. And it's very complicated because, like, that's a major way that capitalism works. Um, and some games operate like capitalism. Uh, the motivation for, doing actions in certain games can sometimes be, well, if you don't do this, you're going to get hurt, or you are going to miss out on something important, or you're going to feel bad, or something like that. And I'd like to see more of an attitude towards, like, dealing with, in some games, not all games, more of an attitude towards, like, this is the reward you get, but not necessarily have it be a financial reward. Have it be something like, you actually helped other people, or something like that. So, positive and negative motives. And those in the textbook are focused on intrinsic and extrinsic rewards, or just model, like, types of motives and approaches. So those are definitely ones that we'll be looking at. So let's see. Hierarchy of needs theory. Here's where I was talking about Maslow. We're actually going to, while we're sitting here, because this is basically my work time, and I'm kind of hanging out by myself today. I'm going to go ahead and search for Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Native Americans. Blackfoot beliefs, not Cherokee. I apologize. But this is actually really important. There are differences between the theories here. Like, Maslow specified it in different ways and stuff like that, but a lot of the stuff that's in this difference here is based on basically, like, people that Abraham Maslow went to. Oh gosh, I can't talk today. He went to the Blackfoot people and studied their kind of perspective, and then came back and said, here's my perspective, and published it. And it's very, like, it's very, like, interesting in seeing how Maslow chose to change what they saw and things like that. But the perspective is still, like, we should recognize the Blackfoot perspective, I think. And I also think it's kind of as important as a perspective on how needs work, because so you can see that on the left here of these two things on my screen, the Western perspective, it says, which is based on Maslow's hierarchy, has physiological needs at the base with safety needs and then belongingness and so on going up. While the First Nations perspective, or the Blackfoot perspective, which may not be the same as all of the First Nations, is with self-actualization at the bottom, then community actualization and cultural perpetuity. And like, this article is discussing how they felt that, like, this is kind of a appropriation of this, which of this perspective that was later popularized as Maslow's theory with readjustment of the order. Um, but it's described as how the triangle is not a triangle; it's a teepee. Um, and I think that it's something that like is really important to realize that like one of our base like theories on needs was taken and adjusted without fair credit, I think, from First Nations people, specifically the Blackfoot Indians, Blackfoot Natives, and I I think that especially because so much of needs based theories and motivation have been informed by Maslow, it's important that we talk about that and think about that. So I may be covering that a little bit in the episode with a little bit more coherence than I am here now, because I have a whole bunch of thoughts in my head and I keep on trying to like put them out. But sometimes, when you're by yourself, your thoughts just kind of get a little jumbled. So Maslow and Blackfoot. I'm just gonna go ahead and see if I can find the link, the best link for this. Blackfoot Digital Library not working. That's unfortunate. Well, I'll stick with this and see if I can find a better detailed link for and like maybe see if I can get a better link to put in the doobly-doo whenever I post the video, depending on if I cover it in detail. But that's influenced, so it's influenced my perspective on the needs theory, because like while all of these things make sense, I'm not like all of the things in Maslow's hierarchy, which if you're not familiar, they go physiological, so food, water, oxygen, then safety, so that's stuff like freedom from violence and like a safe job and stuff like that. Then belongingness, acceptance by peers and having friendships and stuff. Esteem as positive self-image and recognition and stuff like that. And then self-actualization is about like meeting your full potential and becoming more competent, becoming a better person. And so I'd really like, I understand how important Maslow's hierarchy is, and I don't think that we should be like throwing it out. But I do think that, we need to consider where it came from and make sure that we're being fair to the choices made in realigning the theories. Then there's a couple of other theories that are needs-based, which is like the two-factor theory, which is basically based on like satisfaction, and the motivators and stuff are related to working conditions and stuff like that for dissatisfaction. It almost kind of like takes Maslow's hierarchy, splits it into two, and then says, so all of these things that are like primarily positive stuff are in the area of satisfaction, and all these things that have a risk of having negative stuff can have the area of dissatisfaction. And the way those things work together is kind of basically like the motivators and hygiene factors are what they're called. Motivators influence your satisfaction, while hygiene factors influence your dissatisfaction, and those have kind of little levels together. So two-factor might be a good one to go over just because it does break things down into like a positive negative sort of thing. And acquired needs. Oh, I haven't read acquired needs in a while. Um, it's basically like based on things that you gain over your life, kind of. So you don't start out, is the theory. Like, you don't start out with need for achievement, a need for affiliation, or a need for power. And these are, a need for achievement is to surpass something difficult or like to do well, to succeed. Affiliation is based on relationships and stuff like that. And then power is influence and control. And that's like becoming in power over others kind of thing. And acquired needs theory is really interesting, and I think definitely needs to be considered because I think that it is super relevant to games, even more so than the others. While I do think that we, in a lot of game design, we focus on acquired needs theory type design, where we're focusing on what are the things that people don't base need. Things that I call base needs are like what Maslow calls like physiological needs and safety needs. And I instead have been trying to shift my design focus to be on things where I talk about like basically what are these base needs that we need to satisfy before we can play the game. And that's where like script change came in as a tool, my toolbox that I made that basically helps you deal with content at your table and stuff like safety a little bit and consent, which is really important. And I think that it is often often forgotten in earlier design. So I really like, I think that I will have an opportunity to talk about acquired needs where that is how we have designed for a really long time, focusing on satisfying these needs without necessarily actually going back to the base needs that are talked about in things like Maslow. And like, while we might talk about like characters in the game having base needs like physiological needs and stuff like that and safety needs, we don't always actually have to deal with it. And we also like might frame them differently. Like, it's just like how many rations you happen to have, not necessarily that you need to eat. We quantify rather than kind of put value on certain things. And I think that's actually important. Kind of wish some of my friends were here to talk about this, because I'd love to hear what they think about motivation theories and needs-based theories in games. Maybe I'll pose that question on Twitter after the stream. Basically ask a little bit about what you think of how we've used motivation theories in games. Because I think, like I was saying, that we focused a lot on acquired needs, rather than, and on like the motivator side of two-factor and stuff, rather than needs-based theories that are like focusing on base needs, like Maslow's stuff. So it's very interesting. Other motivation theories. Let's see, reinforcement perspective. That's, oh. Positive reinforcement is like, it's a obviously like good thing. Positive reinforcement focuses primarily on like giving immediate and positive feedback, rather than focusing exclusively on punishment. But I'm not sure if it might be too much to cover in one episode. if I want to also cover empowerment at all. Sometimes it's challenging deciding what to put in an episode and what I might have to break out to a later, like, season 2 episode, because the we are moving into planning season 2 episodes, and along with those, like, I can break into some of the deeper, like, more complex advanced theories and stuff like that if I want to, and I probably will. Uh, but one, making them relevant to a game is hard. There's not actually a lot of positive feedback in games that aren't just here's your XP. So that will be something I might have to run by John to, like, kind of get his perspective on, to make sure I'm not overloading the episode. But I'll note it down. Basically what I do here is I, like, outline some of the stuff I want to talk about and put down any of my, like, core notes. Yeah, because, like, there's also expectancy theory. Victor Vroom is one of the coolest names in leadership, by the way. Like, literally, Victor Vroom. Like, it sounds so, like, comic booky. Expectancy theory, I could at least have some diagrams because it uses the E is greater than P expectancy and all that. And equity theory. Yeah. These are a lot. I don't want to confuse the viewers, I guess. So I'm gonna have to... Equity theory is based on, like, people wanting to have social equity as the rewards for performance. So it's like people who get promotions and pay and stuff like that make them on the same level as those who are their otherwise peers or their ideal peers. Equity theory is good to some degree, but it also sometimes comes with the base idea of who people think are actually equal and valued in the first place. So, like, say I work in a workplace and I'm a non-binary person, but I'm perceived as a woman. And basically, like, while I'm working there, I do a whole bunch of really cool stuff that should be rewarded, right? But most of my other colleagues are cis men. And because I'm kind of like working in this environment, and like maybe the only other women are in roles that maybe pay the same or less than I do, less than I earn, and they basically think that because I'm not a man, there's no reason to bring me to a fair pay rate or level of responsibility with them. It's where you have to watch out for biases a lot. This kind of stuff is really hard because this happens with all kinds of motivation rewards kind of theory and stuff like that. There is a huge risk all the time of this bias from basically like what people think is actually quality based on who it's coming from. It is a very commonly known thing for women and non-binary people and lots of gender non-conforming people in the basically like nerd industries of like comics and games, that if a guy does something, it's going to be praised more. And this is pretty true throughout most industries, actually. And it's not that like we have any issue with guys. I love guys, they're wonderful. But sometimes the perception of the world and the biases of the world favor men over other people of other genders. And like equity theory kind of breaks if your boss sees your coworkers who are guys as here and like maybe in a little range, and then sees you as down here with like the people who maybe aren't professionals and got hired into positions that are not the same, you know, pay level as that. And like there are class considerations there too. There's racial considerations there. Like prejudice has a lot of impact on how we reward people. Like talk about how like so many women don't get raises because they are never offered them. Meanwhile, like men get raises naturally every year. And that's not necessarily 100% true for every guy ever. So please don't take me as saying all men earn all the money all the time. But like statistically, likely that men are more likely to get paid and given raises and rewards that women and other people of other genders have to struggle to obtain. So these theories that I talk about here that we're looking at on the screen, like you have to think about all the factors with them. You can't just say, well, this is absolutely good because, you know, nobody will be hurt by that. Because it probably could hurt somebody if you don't try and change the biases and everything that starts at the beginning. If your office has a bias problem, and if your game table has a bias problem, it will definitely reflect back onto any sort of rewards and motivation you put into place. Hey, Rourke, thank you for stopping by. I'm so glad to see you. I've been talking about motivation today, and I went over our goals a little bit earlier, and right now I'm trying to kind of explain the problems with motivational theories. Happy New Year to you as well. And Happy New Year to everybody who watches, because it is officially 2019 and I'm not ready for it. Your current motivation is snuggling with a cat. That sounds pretty nice. My cat was recently walking around with a bag around his head. I don't know what to do with him. He's such a silly boy. The next part of the episode that I'm hoping to cover, if we can make time work for it, is I want to talk about empowerment. And there are a couple of different types of like empowerment theory and stuff like that. It's not as complicated as motivation is, I guess, even though like it kind of can be. So empowerment is about power sharing, delegation of power or authority to subordinates in the organization. So basically it's like we take the situation and put it a little bit in your hands. So let me just type up this definition and then I will pop down to this lower section of the page. Yes, I did just make shooting noises. If you heard that, I'm sorry. Just like trying to kill my typos. Um, so this is basically empowerment is kind of it's kind of GM-less games, in a way. Uh, Thank you. I'm glad they're good noises. Um, Empowerment is basically whenever the overarching organization takes some of their power and gives it to the people. So this can be things like, in the psychological model of empowerment here, it talks about employees receiving information about company performance. So this is basically just like you find out more of the details and therefore have access to better decision making related to your work. Employees receive knowledge and skills to contribute to company goals. And this is basically like you basically are now considered a factor in whether the company itself succeeds. And that means that you get educated, you get training and development and stuff like that. A lot of training and development programs are supposed to be empowerment programs. So like my workshop that I've been doing, that I've been working on and that I did at Big Bad Con, like those kinds of workshops are empowerment. It is giving you the power to be in control of what's going on. And then there's stuff like being able to make decisions in the organization, which is rarer, but is actually like a thing. Some organizations have lower level employees still get to have control over decision making in the company. This happens a lot with startups. Can also not go very well in startups because they don't try to, organize things smoothly. But if it's done well, it can be really awesome. Employees understand the meaning and impact of the jobs. So one of the biggest things that people tend to forget that like knowledge and meaning are like really important and work together really tightly. It's hard to find meaning in your work if you don't know what you're doing, and it is hard to really know what you're doing if you have no like engagement and care for the work that you're doing. Then the employees are rewarded based on company performance. This has like mixed success, because sometimes if a company is still not doing things, respectfully and well, and the employees are doing their best, they can end up punished for the company's failure. I would say a probably good example of employees who were damaged by failed company performance whenever they were supposed to benefit from, their hard work is stuff like the auto companies that failed. And like what I can try and do is break this down with some game concepts. And like I can see some of it like as I just need to like figure out which games might actually make sense for it. Because empowerment in traditional games like D&D is not really high, and then it becomes a little bit more confusing and weird whenever you move into GM-less games and modern games. So there's some places where I could explore this and ask some questions. So I need to dig into that a little bit. And then job design for empowerment is, so let me just go ahead and put these headers in here. Psychological model. I think I said physiological model earlier. I'm sorry. That is not how you spell psychological. Pew, pew. And job design. So job design is whenever you actually make your jobs focus on higher level needs and increase motivation. Um, and that can be things like it talks about here like increasing skill variety. So this would be like whenever you go from like a really simple game to a game that like has like a whole bunch of different skill options to allow you to um, feel like you can kind of do more stuff. Um, One of the games that's actually designed a lot to focus on empowerment is Fate, right? And I use Fate a lot because like it does actually have a lot of flexibility in how you interpret it. So like maybe I sometimes interpret it broadly, but I think that sometimes it can be very useful to understand these things. But like with Fate characters, even though you have pretty simple concept stuff, you have a variety of skills, and you know, you kind of get to choose how and like with approaches, choose how to approach a a specific task in game and stuff like that. And like, there's a lot of power in decision making. You're very competent in Fate. And that's a lot what job design is about, is giving you the power to do all the things that you could potentially be doing. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Um, because I really like I think job design is interesting because it's a lot about like making tasks significant and making sure that's part of your job so that like you aren't like bored and uninterested and feeling disconnected. Um, and it also is about giving you like autonomy and stuff like that. And it ties really well into stuff like Daniel Pink's theory of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Um, it doesn't focus as much on purpose, though it does talk about designing jobs to give feedback and show the outcomes. So Rourke asks, with games where players determine the setting, there might be parallels in workers controlling their working conditions. Absolutely, absolutely. Whenever you give players a lot of control, um, basically like in any sort of world building or setting and like what kind of stuff can be included, you absolutely do have a parallel with like controlling working conditions there. Because it's like, what am I going to have to deal with whenever I play in this game, right? Um, for example, in turn, at the start of the game, you use script change and some discussion, and you can rule out pretty much anything you don't want to see in the game. And basically, like, you can control levels of like whether you encounter prejudice in the game or how you encounter it, like if it's like a fade to black or if you just skip over it and stuff like that. And like that's part of many games. Like there are discussions like this where you decide what you're going to encounter, and that's basically like coming into an office and saying, well, there's going to definitely be air conditioning in the summer and definitely going to be heat in the winter, and I totally want a kitchenette. Like it is that negotiating your environment, and that does empower you to like control the situation, to be in charge to a degree. And so I really appreciate bringing that Rourke. That's really a great thing to bring up. Let me put a little note here about working conditions comparison. Player control sign. Yeah, that's really a really good point, and something I think I might bring up in the episode if I can work it in, because I like that. I'm just checking over this last few bits here. Yeah, then it goes into like the new ideas and thriving workforce is actually something I want to note on. So a thriving workforce is basically is like a workforce that is alive, energized, and passionate. And like most millennials, and I mean most workers today would probably say they're pretty far from a thriving workforce. And it's supposed to be one of the ideals. But like we can see at a game table, whenever we empower people and we motivate them properly, they turn into people who are excited and energetic and who are passionate for the play. Like they are just into it, right? But like there's some questions about like whether we have to we satisfy like basic needs before we bring people to the table. Like, can you really like ask people to put in their like whole effort if you can't support them whenever they are too tired or something like that? So it's something that I think I definitely want to touch on in some way, how we want to have this like thriving workforce, and likewise how we want to have enthusiastic players and what you have to do to make that environment happen. And this is a lot about like some stuff I talked about recently with like safe spaces, and how you have to like do the base work, and a lot of organizations aren't doing it, and a lot of games aren't doing it, like game tables and GMs and stuff like that. It's maybe better than it has been, but like I know even I can't, from my position, provide my friends with food every time they come over and stuff like that. So I wonder if it's possible to do this on a micro level, or if the reality is that our world's a little broken, and the larger kind of networks and the larger structures and infrastructures are not supporting a happy, healthy workforce. People don't have the capacity to put their full selves into stuff like hobby stuff, like games. I just wonder about that. And so that might be something I look into a little bit on this. It depends on how dark I'm willing to get with an episode, I suppose. Because I do try and keep this, like, you know, a little bit applicable for more than just this time of, you know, time of our lives and everything. But I think that maybe this is something that is gonna be an issue for a while. So, we're coming up to the 5 minutes still mark, and I think it's only Rourke in the chat, but if you have any questions, now would be a great time to ask them, so I have time to respond to them before I finish up at 1:30 in about 5 minutes. So feel free to ask any questions right now. No problem, Rourke. Thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. It made this a little bit less lonely than it could have been. But I really appreciate your company and your questions. And again, your point on working conditions is really great. I really appreciate it. I couldn't help Broggy in getting the bag off of his head because he ran away while I was still on stream. I like looked over at early in the stream. If you watch the video, you'll see me. I'm just like reaching, but he was just not into it. He ran off on his own. Sometimes he gets overexcited when he gets in playing with stuff that he finds in the house. He likes to pick up trash, like clean trash, so like stuff like plastic bags that were from shopping and stuff like that, and just carry them around the house. And sometimes it ends up with one getting stuck on his head or something like that. He's ridiculous. I'll probably go right after this and find him and make sure he's doing fine. I'm sure he is because I've heard him running around. He's a silly boy. Plenty of those to go around. I love him too. He's a very good kitty. He's very mischievous, but he's very sweet and he's very smart. We recently had to like basically tape up a part of our wall that's like a utility closet because he climbed in and hid in it, and I had to like lure him out with kitty food and like hugs and stuff, and he was just like, I don't want to, I like it in the dark. But got him out safe and taped it up very good. So I think I'm actually gonna wrap up here because I don't have anything else I want to cover right at the moment. I need to work on this episode more just on my own before I can talk about it more. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up. But thank you so much for coming. And thank you to anyone who watches. If you would like to support Leading with Class, and if you would like to watch our episodes, you can go to patreon.com/leadingwithclass. You can catch us on Twitter at leadingwclass and on Instagram at leadingwithclass. We plan to make many more episodes. It just takes time. Thank you so much, and have a happy 2019.